Today we're joined by Gerald Duran, a successful serial entrepreneur with over 36 years of experience. Founder of CanaGlobal and author of 2 books, Gerald has been featured on Inc. 500, Deloitte Top Technology 50, Corporate 100, Business Journal's Top 25, and the Top 40 Under 40. Gerald, thank you for joining us and your willingness to tell your story with us today. How are you?
Glad to be here. Now you recognize I no longer qualify for the 40 under 40.
I don't either.
That season is over.
We won't talk about that. We'll just keep moving.
Okay. Great to be here with you.
Well, thanks for joining us. Why don't we start out and just tell us a little bit about your family and some of your hobbies so we can get a chance to get to know you a little bit better.
Absolutely. So, my wife Leslie, she's my one and only wife. We've been married for over 30 years, and I have 2 children. I have a son who's a digital marketing manager, branding, is 27 years old, and I've got a little guy up in heaven, and so I think he's 23 now, up in heaven, and we live in sunny Arizona, and really, if I have a hobby, it's golfing. But honestly, most of my time spent around, just building CanaGlobal and into this new season in my life.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, how long have you been doing Cana?
So we started Cana in 2016, and we built out first a physical location in Milwaukee, and then in 2018 we built out a real large facility in Los Angeles, and in the beginning of 2020 we took everything that we're doing and we went 100% online.
So, why don't we back up a little bit and share with our audience kind of how you got to CanaGlobal? Where did you start? What was the process? Obviously, you've been at this for a long time. And if I recall, it had something to do with coding and technology. And so go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, coding was part of the journey. My life is probably divided into 3 seasons. In my first season, over a span of 16 years, I launched my first company, young and dumb, really underqualified. And I started a staffing company in Newport Beach, California. But in those first 16 years, I launched, grew, and exited 4 companies. And so that really gave me kind of a basis of a learning experience of how to climb this entrepreneurial mountain. And then my second season was in the business turnaround sector, and we turned around problem companies. And you're right. I started in the late '90s. I started the first coding camp in the country, and we've since then built them all over the country. So we kind of the term learn to code. It started with us in Kansas City, Missouri, and then I'm in my third season. That started in 2016, which is really just sharing what I know with aspiring entrepreneurs who are either getting ready to launch a company, launched a company, or maybe they're a seasoned entrepreneur with experiencing flat or declining revenue.
Okay. And so, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, so we're basically a learning organization tied into an entrepreneur accelerator and incubator, and we're focused on faith-driven entrepreneurs that are going after their God-planted entrepreneurial dreams.
Okay. And so, if I recall, when you started, you had a brick and mortar facility. Kind of talk a little bit about that brick and mortar facility, because if I recall, it was a bit larger than your average incubator, and it was offering some pretty cool features.
Yeah, I mean, when we first started out, we were in Milwaukee, and a friend of mine owned a big co-working space, and we just rented it out at nighttime. I think you're talking about Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
In 2018, a church came to us, and they wanted to partner to build out a faith-based version of what we had seen in Chicago at a place called 1871. And so we had 4 acres in the middle of Los Angeles, which is almost unheard of, and 88,000 square feet of indoor-outdoor space. And we really built this complex for with events going on almost every day of the week for co-working, incubator, our version of what church looks like, our version of what Bible study looks like. And so really equipping entrepreneurs, and I would say that probably 80% of the people that visited our campus were believers, but probably unchurched. And so we're really reaching, I think, a group of entrepreneurs in the marketplace that the church wasn't reaching. And the challenge, though, that we learned, even though it was a fascinating experience, is we can only reach in Los Angeles. We had a 5 mile radius of who we could reach, because anything over 5 miles is over an hour drive in Los Angeles. So one of the keys, and we took this online before COVID hit, so we were we didn't know, but we were ahead of the game. And today our community, I mean, just last year we had 4,500 people join us from Africa. And so we really deal with people from all over the world, same issues. And so we really, experience explosive growth in that area.
Yeah, so you had mentioned that your passion is helping change makers connect the dots between business, purpose, success, and faith. How does CanaGlobal do that?
Well, so there's, if you're an entrepreneur, we have a term that we use called a full stack entrepreneur. And we borrowed that term from the coding world where, we were developing full stack developers. And so a full stack developer can do everything from front end all the way to the back end. A full stack entrepreneur understands everything that has to happen in customer acquisition in that whole process, and they're the owner architect of that. So there's these entrepreneurial skills that you have to know, but then what we add to that, and this is how we connect the dots between business, purpose, success, and faith. There's 10 things around faith and purpose that we have merged into what we do. And in my own experience, as when I first started my first company as a young entrepreneur, in my first year I was failing. I wasn't making any money. 1 year into starting this company, making no money. And in my cry out to God, I knew that He knew how to make my company successful. And I reached out to Him. And He showed me. And so what I've learned over the last 36 years is that some of the most innovative ideas are from God Himself. And He shares this knowledge. And I'm talking about really practical stuff like, a marketing plan or innovative product. Stuff that you're never going to hear about in church. I think a lot of people go to God for, increase my faith, help me with my spirituality, but they don't go to Him for these practical things. And to me, I've always looked at the Bible not so much as a book of rules, but as a book of promises. And so like a lawyer that looks at case law to the benefit of their client, I'm somebody that looks at biblical promises. And, I have this God, I'm always working on a God assignment and a God season. And I'm looking for promises and truths and tools to help me accomplish what He has called me to do, especially in the marketplace.
That's awesome. So as a struggling entrepreneur, and I come across, your website, kind of walk me through what's the standard process, what's the standard protocol, what can I expect as a new customer, if you will, of CanaGlobal?
Well, today what our focus is we understand that there's all of these new and seasoned entrepreneurs that believe what's inside of them is a God-planted dream. And we realize that there's two types of them. There's do-it-yourselfers, and then there's people that are looking for structured mentorship. And so the very first thing we do, and we spend a lot of money attracting people into a community. It's kind of like a Facebook group, but it's on our platform. And every week we tackle a subject that has to do with climbing the entrepreneurial mountain. We make a couple of videos. We do a podcast such as this, and we share it with the community. I write an article. And it's just a way for like-minded people who are going after God-planted dreams to share with each other. So that is a huge part of what we do. And we're really walking them through this journey. For those people that are looking for something structured and want mentorship, we have our accelerator. And so that's it's very similar to what we used to do in person as a in-person incubator. But it's a 12 to 15 week accelerator where we take people from ideation all the way to launch or relaunch if they're already an established company. We do it, and so it's a really structured program. It's on demand. It's online live, and we mix in the entrepreneurial components of being full stack, and then we add in these 10 stages of faith and purpose into our curriculum.
So when these companies or startups are coming to you, what do you find is kind of the biggest stumbling point for them, and how do you work them through that?
So they all have something in common, flat or declining revenue. So we're going after people who are stuck, because people who are stuck are always hungry. When you're stuck, especially as an entrepreneur, if you're not making money, you're going to feel this pain and you're hungry and you're out there looking for, and more than ever, even, what do they say? There's no atheist in the foxhole. So, every entrepreneur I know, if God's offering help, they'll take it. And so that we meet them. What I would tell you is that the people that come to Cana aren't necessarily looking for a deeper relationship with God. They're coming to Cana because they're trying to figure out how to solve their problems. And I would say 80, 90% of them are struggling with revenue. They're out there doing something, it's not working. And, you know, Ryan, this is exactly, even though I grew up in church, but when I was 18 years old and, I left, I wouldn't say I left my beliefs, but I certainly left church and I was out being an 18-year-old. And when I started my first business at 23, for 1 year, I'm making no money. And it was kind of like miracles happened to open up the staffing company in Newport Beach, California. But for a year, I'm making no money. And I'm driving a diesel truck at nighttime just to pay my bills. And I was so stressed out. And I know you've been an entrepreneur for a long time. Anybody who's climbed, I know you're serial. You've done it over and over and over.
Right.
So you know what these moments are like when nothing you're doing is working. And it's at that time that I remember crying out for God and saying, look, this burden I'm carrying of stress is too much for my body. Your Bible says that you offer peace, so I want it. What kind of God makes a promise and doesn't keep it? And in that experience, Ryan, after a year of making no money, something happened when I reached out with God and this burden lifted. My problem was still there, but I no longer had the stress. And I would say for a lot of people that come to Cana, that's the very first thing that starts to happen. They get a peace. But here's the second part. I sat there and I found the scripture, James 1:5, that says that we can go to God and ask him for wisdom. It's a promise from God. And it says, despite the sin in your life, and trust me, at 24 years old, I had all kinds of sin in my life. I was out doing everything wrong. And, but I sat there thinking, God, you must know exactly what I'm doing wrong. What kind of father knows exactly what I'm doing wrong and won't tell me? So this scripture that I found, James 1:5, and I found a few others like that, says that you'll give me wisdom. So show me what I'm doing wrong. Do you know that within about a week, I started getting new ideas of my product, how to go to market, and I started getting this whole marketing and sales plan, this customer acquisition system. And every day for a year, I'm going into this filing cabinet up here, and there was nothing there.
Right.
I'm going through the filing cabinet, nothing there. All of a sudden, I started having these ideas that weren't there, and I really felt like God put them there. And within 30 days, I executed those ideas, and immediately we started making a ton of revenue. And it was at that moment that this change, we started experiencing product market fit, started understanding what a marketing and sales ecosystem looked like at the time. And it gave us the resources to start expanding offices. That moment changed something in me. I started looking to God as my business partner. And I started partnering with God. God doesn't create any plans that fail. So I thought, man, if you want to partner with something, partner with God. I mean, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were entrepreneurs. All the disciples were entrepreneurs. Even the tax collector, Jesus was an entrepreneur, right? He was a carpenter. So that is what has changed my life. And when in the turnaround business, when companies have hired us to turn around their companies, and we have a reputation in a couple of different industries, one of the things most of them know is that we're believers, and they know that we have this insight that's uncommon. And a lot of them would would say, oh, Gerald's prophetic, and I say, no, it's really not. It's not so much that. It's just I understand the promises of the Word, and so I go to God for these things, and God gives me ideas. And one of the I think gifts that I have is when a company is struggling, it doesn't take me very long to figure exactly what's wrong. Now, figuring out the solution takes a little bit more work,
Right.
but I know that that's a gift from God, and it came out of that first experience at 23 when God did this work in my life, and it's been the basis for everything that I've done from that point. It's what we do today at Cana every single day.
That's awesome. So, brand. Let's talk about branding because that's a big topic today. And here you hear a lot of folks talking about personal brand and your corporate brand. So, what is your personal and professional brand? And for those that are trying to define their own brand, what advice can you bring to the table that might help someone to discover who they are and how do they own that brand today?
Well, when we were discovering our business model and what it is, and the tool we were using was in the way that we vetted our business model was using Lean Business Canvas, going through that process through ideation. Through that process, we started to we built a brand positioning article about the problem that we were out to solve, how we got there, what the solution. We went through a lot of different states and built this big narrative. But ultimately, how that went from this brand positioning article into establishing a brand, and a lot of people think branding's like a design or something, and that's a portion of it. But what happened with us is we developed a voice, a message, a movement around what we were for and what we were against. So for me, when I look at this entrepreneurial mountain, and there's two types of entrepreneurs. There's the entrepreneurs that are venture funded, and it's usually in tech, and they're building a tech startup, and they're going to VC who want to be I have a love-hate with venture capitalists because they want to call the winners and the losers like Shark Tank, and but for those that are looking for capital, only 1% get it, and of the 1% that get it, less than 10% succeed. There's a lot of failure over there. For those that are climbing the entrepreneurial mountain and they're building lifestyle companies or they're bootstrapping, it's the same amount of failure. So it's really understanding and seeing all these entrepreneurs climbing up this Mount Everest, and 90% are dying on the mountain. That problem developed, and may I add that when you look at the top three reasons why they're failing, it's totally preventable. Number one reason is you just simply run out of cash. Number two reason is because they have bad product market fit. Number three reason is they don't know how to plan and prepare to build a customer acquisition system. So they don't know how to generate revenue. So our message, when we say what we're for and what we're against, you know what I'm against? All these entrepreneurs unnecessarily dying on this mountain, creating all this debt and all the mess that happens when you fail as an entrepreneur and how it touches you individually, your identity, your family. I mean, you're a serial entrepreneur, so you've climbed the mountain many times.
Yes.
And you know that what the mountain doesn't do, the mountain doesn't say, oh, Gerald, oh, you have an Inc. 500 or a couple of them. Oh, just take the elevator. No, what the mountain says is this time we're going to take you down.
Right.
So when you're building a brand, you really have to understand what you're for and what you're against. Then you can't be afraid of being polarizing. So one of the greatest examples, I think, if we look at who's really good at, what is polarization? It's magnetizing. On one side you attract, on the other side you repel. So you look at Gary Vee. I mean, Gary Vee has, he has a really polarizing message, but he attracts people who would celebrate his message. And because his talk is not necessarily politically correct, and because he's probably not from the establishment elite, he's from this other kind of group that and represents this growing group that just want transparency, and he repels I think a lot of political correctness that is in the entrepreneurial message. For me, 20 years ago, I decided that when I go speak at a conference or if I do a podcast or do something, whenever I was out there, if they asked, I'm not going to be afraid of talking about my faith. Why? Because none of my revenue comes from the people that are listening. My revenue comes from my provider, God. So I just thought, and what I've realized over the last 20 years is it creates great hope. Our message, our brand creates great hope for people that feel like they have these God planted dreams. There's this idea or dream inside them. And what they're asking is, will your God do for me what he did for you? So, branding to me and our brand is about understanding what we're for and what we're against. We're totally against people unnecessarily climbing this mountain and dying on it. It's being okay, being polarizing so that we attract people that would celebrate. And that is tied into, I get asked to speak at conferences and a lot of different podcasts. And, one of the things I always ask people, do you want me to, is it okay to talk about my faith or not? And, I'll respect either way. But, I was just doing one from a startup group out of Milwaukee, and they're like, no, share what you want. And it was really interesting. I didn't bring it up. I let them bring it up. They say, what's your secret for success? And I says, it's God. And so that is a very polarizing message, but it's our unfair competitive advantage because here's the thing. We're not only developing full stack entrepreneurs that have the business skill, but we're teaching them how to be powered and partnered with God. That's our brand. And so I love the idea that when you are, it's impossible to fail. I can experience what doesn't work and call that failure, but ultimately I can never fail. And that's why, you've heard the term, fail fast, fail forward, that kind of stuff. Well, for me, there's never been a plan B. I've never quit anything. I pivot, I change what I'm doing, I learn things, but so this is what we're teaching in our brand. Kind of a long way around that, but
no, I think that's
you get
great.
what I'm saying.
It's all about being authentic and just keep on moving forward. And instead of asking your neighbor for advice, go to God and what is my plan and where am I supposed to be? And if he gives you nothing, then you're supposed to wait.
Yeah. And, I think one of the hardest things is, there's 6,000 plus promises in the Bible. They weren't written to us, but they were all written for us. That's what Second Timothy says. But when I receive a promise by faith, let's say I'm looking for a business model, or let's say I'm looking for a new house, or let's say I'm looking for a new office building, whatever it is. Let's say I'm trying to develop peace, I'm trying to develop patience, whatever it is. I take the promise by faith. So when I see a promise, it's mine. But then I have to trust God for the how and the when. And one of the things that, so when I go to Amazon and order something, the price has been paid. When I go to God with the promise, the price has been paid. It's been paid by Jesus Christ. Unfortunately, God doesn't have Prime. He doesn't have Amazon Prime. So we have to trust him, I think, for the how and the when. And I think that's the hardest part on the journey is really trusting God for how and the when and having the patience and learning perseverance and what that looks like and learning how to battle doubt, learning how to not be moved by what I see or how I feel, but to be moved by our faith. And, you see that in a lot of serial entrepreneurs, whether they talk about faith or not, they have that value inside them that they know they're going after something. It's something that matters. And no matter how many times it doesn't work, like old Abe Lincoln, you look at his horrible story. I mean, it's almost depressing, all the failure that poor guy went through to, become president. But I mean, it's how have you dealt with this? So, when you look at your history, you've done some incredible things. And you're an innovator because I was looking at your LinkedIn profile and in our conversations, I see all these, innovations. Well, when you're first doing an innovation, it's never been done before. So right. People question it and you don't have anybody to copy. You're inventing it as you go. What have you done when you're innovating?
Well, I think it's just, my first step is always to pray about it. And I learned very, very early on that when you do that, you do it with your wife. Because if you exclude the wife,
that's a lot of wisdom. That's a lot of wisdom right there.
if you exclude your wife, then and you try and do things and borrow money without them knowing, it goes very poorly very quickly. But from an innovation standpoint, everything I've always done has always been not necessarily cutting edge, but bleeding edge. Like you said, no one has ever done this before. And so you don't have a rule book. But I kind of look at it the same way in starting a business where there isn't necessarily a right way or a wrong way to start a company. And well, I take that back. There is. I always look to what's the Lord's plan, and that's how I go about doing things. I mean, that's how I got to where I am today.
Right.
I ended up leaving a very successful company here a number of months ago to pursue a passion that I've had. And I did that because the Lord spoke to me and said, it's time to go do something else, you serial entrepreneur, crazy man. And we're going to do this in the middle of a pandemic, right? Because why not?
Yeah.
It seems like I always have a tendency to take the big leap of faith during a huge turn in the economy. So the last one was in, the real estate, crash,
Right.
And here we are in COVID world. But so yeah, it's definitely been a challenge. But I think as an entrepreneur, you always just persevere. There, as you said, there is no such thing as failure. We will pivot, we will change, and we will persevere.
When you get back to, you had mentioned personal brand.
Yes.
When you understand your true identity, and your identity is not shaped based on your results this week, this month, this quarter, this year, your identity is shaped in who God created you to be and who He says you are, you walk a little taller because you realize that the creator of everything created me with a purpose to do this thing. He created you to do this thing that He's put on your heart. Yep, it's a journey. Yep, the mountain climb is treacherous, but that, he says, I choose the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. The first time I read that scripture, Ryan, I thought, Lord, sign me up. I'm your guy.
Right.
And, literally everything I've ever done, my first idea has never worked. It's God has showed me an innovative idea that I was already equipped to do. I just didn't realize it. I was, usually when I start something, well, if I could get this property, if I can get this money, if I can get all these different things.
Right.
And what I've come to realize over the last 36 years is everything you need, you already have it. And all the provision and wisdom, knowledge, and understanding is up ahead, up the mountain. You have to climb up to get it. And, something very similar started in 2016 when I started Cana. I was in my 16th year of doing business turnarounds, and I was doing turnarounds in 7 cities. So in most of these companies, we're doing I'm either interim CEO or co-CEO with like the founder or something. And so I'm doing 7 cities and, just traveling like a crazy man back and forth and making tons and tons of revenue doing it. You make a lot of money doing turnarounds if you do them successfully. And the order I got from God was, I want you to leave that all behind, walk away from it into this new season. So I was going from one season to the next season, or one wineskin to the new wineskin. You can never take the old wine into the new wine season. And so he told me to leave all that. Well, here's the thing, Ryan. About 12 years prior to that, I had a desert season in my life where I lost everything. I mean, I'm a guy that up till that point, everything I touch turns to gold. I mean, just blessing. Not that I always have had challenges. I've always had battle, but I've always come out on top pretty quick. In this season, before God gave me that order to end my turnaround career, I had kind of a scar from about 12, 13 years before that, where I bought a client out. I bought a for-profit college. that I had helped build, very successful. And I had another company, a marketing company. Both were doing extremely well. And a month after I bought this for-profit college it was in Indiana with 2 locations. Sallie Mae, which was our student lender, stopped lending. It was the financial institutions knew what was happening, or they started to know what was happening. We are going into a recession, but no one was talking about it yet. And they said, "Oh, it's only temporary. We're changing our underwriting rules, and we'll be back." Well, my overhead was $600,000 a month.
Right.
It's a lot of money.
A lot.
And so for 10 months, we weren't. They never did come up with the student funding. I had to fund. I had to self fund, and so I won't get into the whole story, but I ended up losing everything. I lost those businesses. I lost my lifestyle. I think I lost a lot of my identity. And the fear when God told me to leave, now I'm doing really well. He's restored everything. I've gotten double for my trouble, as they say. I was so afraid to go back, like of losing everything again. It
Right.
just, if you've ever lost everything,
Yep.
it's like a general that's really got his rear kicked in the battlefield, and you're like, oh my gosh, that was painful. And so I got rid of every client except one. I was disobedient, where I only had to spend like a half a day a week, and it produced several hundred thousand of income a year. And I thought, oh, well, what can this hurt? And God says, no, 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 no. I need you to trust me. And then I started spending money like a drunken sailor building Cana, you know.
Right.
And I had to go. Ryan, I had to go all in. I had to go into this new assignment, this new season, this new wineskin, burning through my reserves to figure out what was this thing that God was calling me to do.
Yep.
And I'm telling you, it took a while to figure out what it looked like. But my identity was shaped out of who God says I was, not out of my circumstances. So when you talk about personal brand, it's really knowing who you are and
Right.
who God says you are. And when you know your assignment, that creates the brand.
Yeah. And I think, knowing who you are and knowing your identity, but then when you leave the room, that matches up with what people are saying about you as well. Right?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting thing, because there's a time when you're drilling for oil, so to speak, and there's no oil.
Right.
And you get these people, especially non-entrepreneurs, that will say, well, are you making money yet? Well, you're making money. Yeah. And usually friends and family. It's most, it doesn't matter what your background was.
So what are
But
they
these
doing? We're worried about you.
They're serial employees. They've never, and this is where you have to be true to your instincts. I'm sure. So you have to learn who to tell, who not to tell. Joseph maybe made the mistake of telling everybody that, what God was going to do, and he ended up in the pit. Abraham, from the time he got the dream to the time that he fathered a child, I think they had to wait well over 10 years. That's a long time to wait.
Yeah.
And so I think we have to learn not to be defined by where we are in the journey. And this is why faith is so important. When I think about like any home I've ever lived in, or any business building that I've ever put up, those houses or buildings were established up here in my brain. I had ownership of them long before I ever built them. And same thing with a successful company. There's a time when, it's like prosperity is a state of mind, and so is poverty. It's not how much you have in your bank account. So when I look at where I'm going, when I look at what success looks like as I'm fulfilling, that's already mine. That I'm on the journey there, and I haven't experienced, I'm growing, if we're going to use some analogies in seed harvest, I'm growing a root system. And just because it hasn't sprouted above ground where everybody can see it, I've learned it doesn't bother me. It
Right.
doesn't bother me. And I don't care what people think. because as soon as you have success, they're all on your side. So
Right.
what I tend to do is I only hang around with pregnant people, people who are pregnant with the dream. I love hanging out with pregnant serial entrepreneurs because we all have battle scars of the journey. And so we're encouraging to each other. And, it's like, don't you hate it when somebody judges you by a sliver in time?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I can't stand it. I just don't hang around with those people.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's move on a little bit here. So you've worked with as an entrepreneur for a while. Can you recall a time where your ethics and faith was challenged, and how did you deal with it?
Yes. There was a big one. We were doing a turnaround with a college, and colleges are under all this regulation. And this client was paying me a lot of money. And in building a data system, I realized they were cooking their books with the feds. So here's a college that's taking federal money. It's all around all these crazy rules on, retention. And if you're a privately held college, your retention can be horrible. But if you're a for-profit college, it's different rules. And so I found out that in their coding, they were tricking some things and producing these false reports.
Wow.
And the Lord instructed me one night, get out of there. Get out of there. And for like 2 or 3 days, I didn't tell my wife anything, but it was just, I couldn't sleep. And then finally I woke up at 3 in the morning. I woke up my wife and it says, I got to get out of this company. I cannot work with them anymore. And this is a company that 3 times I had turned them around already. And every time there's a biblical saying that the dog always returns to its vomit. And so, you have a way of thinking good or bad. It produces results good or bad. And it produces, doing good or bad produces results good or bad. So these people had stinking thinking and they were trying to take a shortcut. And so I went to them and says, listen, I find cheating in almost every turnaround I go to someplace. And so I'm okay if we expose something and then eradicate it. I'm okay with that in part of, making you healthy. What I'm not okay with is overlooking the eradication of it.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't have a willingness to want to change. And they wanted me to overlook this thing. And so it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do because I really loved the owner. I really, we had some amazing moments together. I love the people of that company. When you're doing a turnaround, you just fall in love with the people of that company. And so I walked away and I had to hold my mouth and I didn't tell anybody why.
Right.
And, there was a made up reason why, I moved away. But do you know that a year later, I was approached by the Attorney General and they were going after these people.
Wow. Wow.
And, and I'm so thankful that I took the hit because it was a hit. I took a financial hit. Now God replaced it, but I mean,
Sure.
so something I've learned is I don't make all my decisions based on money.
That's probably a
I
good
go to
idea.
God and I do what He says, and He will protect that. And so that's an example. It was a really hard thing to do. At the end of the day, it paid off.
That's great. So where does Cana get their customers from? How do people find you?
Well, so we go find them.
Okay.
So, part of building a customer acquisition system, one of the things that we have to understand, I think anybody who's out there in the marketplace, is what buyer journey looks like.
Mm-hmm.
There's really 7 stages of buyer journey, from them becoming aware of who we are, understanding like fully what we do, become interested and start to see us as a solution for their problem, to begin to respect like kind of our brand and our message to the point that they actually trust it. Those are 5 stages of buyer journey. And those 5 stages probably happen in digital. And so they happen online. So for us, it's Facebook and LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm.
And then the 2 final stages of buyer journey are buy-in, so they have budget, and then timing. Those are the stages. So it's really important that we understand what's the problem we're trying to solve, what's the solution, who's the segment, or what are the fish. So we know where the fish are, we know who they are, we know exactly what kind of problem that they're having, and so we only fish for fish that are hungry. So we're reaching out to entrepreneurs who are stuck between seasons. They're not sure why, and they're suffering from lack of revenue or low revenue or
Right.
no revenue. And so we have ad campaigns, and the very first thing we do is invite them into our community. One of the things they've learned is to be generous with our resources first, and for quite a while, and and feed them.
Right.
And so we have people that a year ago saw something. They thought it was a God moment because they were praying to God for something. Sometimes they were praying to God that they weren't even sure if the God existed. We get people from all kinds of different kinds of faiths. So we're really reaching, we're not reaching like a churchy crowd.
Right.
I think 96% of Americans are believers, not necessarily followers. So you got to keep that in mind, right?
Right.
Satan's a believer, but he's not a follower. But they didn't know God was offering help. And they found our message, and all of a sudden, at some point, they're ready.
Hmm.
And so I think that really understanding, depending on their pain level, when you look at the buyer cycle, how long it takes, their pain will drive that. So just like you or I, if we have a lot of tooth pain and we're not sure who to go to, you or I will be in the dentist office pretty quick.
Right.
But without the pain, if it was just a preventative thing, and let's say you moved and you hadn't found a new dentist yet, and you can procrastinate that decision because you don't have any pain. You know it's going to catch up with you if you don't do something about it, but you can kind of take a period of time. What we do is we always speak to pain, and that's what I learned about with doing coding camps. We only built campaigns out of people with lousy careers. That's who goes to coding camp, not people with successful careers. So it's really understanding that and building a digital ecosystem that builds an apparatus. And this is part of being full stack, is really understanding what digital, like remember, all of this is going to happen in digital. So when I looked at LinkedIn, for instance, I have to know who's my audience and how do I make it impossible for the audience that we're going after, for the segment we're going after in the channel, in the social channel that they're in, how do we make it impossible for them not to know who we are? And so it's a combination of content that we create that's shared, owned, earned, and paid. And it's those, and the first three are hard. Paid makes it a lot easier because it does all the work,
Right.
for you. So that's what we do. That's our process.
That's great. So I guess to kind of wrap this up, there's obviously a lot of businesses right now that are struggling for a variety of reasons. What's some advice that you can offer them?
Here it is. In the turnaround practice, we called it TDR. It's an acronym for think, do, results. If you're running a company, regardless of the size, and you're not producing revenue or you're not profitable, there's one reason. There's a lot of symptoms, but the problem is you don't know how. If you knew how, you'd be producing the revenue. So it's kind of like golf. If you're not a scratch golfer, but you want to be, the reason why you're not a scratch golfer is you don't know how. If you knew how, you'd have a scratch game. So we all have a way of thinking, good or bad. That thinking produces doing, good or bad, and that doing produces results. You and I both know this. The thing that gets us there never keeps us there. So there's things we did in old season that used to work, that got us where we are. It's not going to take us up the new mountain. We have to be willing to change our thinking so we could change our doing. And the biggest thing, I think, like if I were to sum up what it is, They don't understand what a digital apparatus looks like or a digital ecosystem, and they haven't adjusted the balance between sales and marketing, especially if they have sales teams. They're relationship driven, but they think the relationship is still person to person. And it hasn't been that way for a long time. The relationship building's all happening online. And the people that have embraced, B2C embraced that really a long time ago. B2B, I would say, especially with small businesses, catching up. Mm-hmm. And this coronavirus season has kicked their butts, because what it did is it stopped the thing, going out and meeting people and calling people on their direct dial numbers into their offices. It's gone.
Right.
And so if you don't have a mechanism, so it's usually pride and ego from the CEO that think they're exempt from changing thinking. They look at their old credentials and they think, hey, let's just go back to what used to work.
Right. And that's not an option anymore.
I wish it was, right? I'd still be doing radio.
Right. All right. Well, I thank you for your time today. I think what we discussed is very inspiring. I hope it inspires others. Should folks have any further questions, how do they get a hold of you?
If they come to our website, which is CanaGlobal, one of the things that's available is anybody who wants to share their story, tell us their story, they can set up a Zoom call. There's a percentage of my calendar that I give back, and I make it open to anyone. And it's one of the most rewarding things to do Zoom calls with perfect strangers and hear what's going on with their life. So they could do that. Go to our website.
That's awesome, man. We'll tag that in the video in the box below here, and
cool.
Provide that link for everyone. So thanks for watching, and check out Tacastic.com for other inspiring podcasts. Thanks a lot, Gerald.
Great being with you. Thank you.